Class, MASH. By Anutty. Chapter 191, Pain Equals Power. Jill regained consciousness, her vision was blurry as she tried to recover. She didn't know how long she had been trapped, but her mouth was dry, and her stomach was empty. The pain of starvation was new to her, and she had no idea how bad it would be. It was worse than any other injury she had experienced before. The thirst was bad, but somehow it mostly affected her speaking and breathing. It didn't hurt quite as much, though she couldn't know what exactly was causing her body to twist like it was. It felt like someone had stuck their hands inside of her gut and were moving things around as they wanted. It would be the worst thing she experienced, if not for the torture the monster was putting her through. It would reach down with one of its many hands and lay a single finger on her head. It felt the creature was dunking her head into fire, and Jill had been forced awake from the pain. It made it hard to tell how much time had passed, as she had passed from unconsciousness to alertness constantly. The occasional surge of pain would wake her, and eventually, it would get so overwhelming that she lost consciousness. It kept happening endlessly for what felt like an eternity. Something was different this time. She hadn't woken up screaming in pain, rather it had been the first time that she had woken up herself. What had happened? She struggled to clear her vision without being able to wipe her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to get a bearing of her surroundings. Nothing had changed about her position, but the creature before had shifted slightly. It was just staring at her, unmoving as it looked down at her. Even with its strange face, Jill could see the arrogance in its expression. It saw Jill as inferior. When the creature saw that Jill was looking, it began to speak. "Well, look who has finally decided to wake up. Good morning, child." The being's words sounded like they were being repeated a dozen times. However, there was only the slightest delay between the voices, so Jill could still understand what the creature was saying. That begged another question though. How was she able to understand the monster? She didn't have any of her items on. The translation device was in a pile with her other belongings. The items were visible from the corner of her eye. Jill didn't respond to the creature, still stunned by the situation. "I can see the questions on your face. You see, I have looked over your memories and have learned your tongue." Jill froze, realizing what the monster meant with its words. The past few days of torture had been nothing to the monster. It had all been to learn her language. She had an item for that. Fear and pain fueled her anger, turning it into a deep loathing. A hatred that was so strong that she wished for the monster's death over her own freedom for a moment. The feeling was subdued quickly as she remembered the others. If her trial was so dangerous, she was even more worried about the others. Although, she wouldn't be surprised to hear that this wasn't how her trial was supposed to go. She held her tongue, knowing that she would only be able to reply inappropriately. The other problem was that she didn't know what to even say to the thing. It was probably looking for something specific, so she kept her mouth shut. She didn't want to get baited into something. "I'm happy to see that you understand the situation. However, I believe we can have a much more beneficial relationship with one another. Let us bury the past and look at the possibilities. How would you like to make a deal with me?" Jill froze, the creature's voice seemed to swirl around her. It felt like the sound was coming from all around her rather than the monster's own mouth. Adamantly resisting the creature, she shook her head. A retort attempted to escape her lips, but she ended up coughing roughly. Not having had any water for, who knew how long, left her throat dry. She couldn't talk even if she wanted to. "Oh my, you shouldn't be so quick to refuse. There is no need to be so hostile. Here, let me help you." As the creature spoke, one of their bony fingers slowly descended toward Jill. It didn't touch her, the finger stopping a few feet above her. Jill felt something filling her mouth, and it quickly went beyond that. She struggled to breathe and swallowed against her better judgment. Thankfully, it just seemed to be water, and she coughed roughly as the being had made too much water. It was a choking cough, but she felt significantly better despite the process. She needed the water more than she thought. Shaking her head as much as she could, she cleared as much water as possible. However, her expression didn't drop in the slightest and she continued to glare at her torturer. Jill didn't think of herself as a vindictive person, but that didn't apply to this thing. Her desire for vengeance was the only thing that kept her going. She would kill this thing, there was no doubt in her mind of that. Even as she was trapped, and starving, she didn't let the thought drop. She had clung to it, imprinted it within herself. Although, she knew that her vengeance wouldn't happen now. Survival was her most important concern, and she found the control to speak. "What do you want?" Even though she managed the words, they were coated with her hatred. Her tone wasn't at all reserved, and she spoke with obvious anger. It didn't seem to bother the creature, who seemed pleased by her response. Jill shivered as she realized that she could read the creature's emotions easily. It didn't seem to hide anything, and its eyes were oddly expressive. "Perfect. I want one of your eyes. In return, I will let you return safely and can make it so that you successfully complete that trial of yours." The monster spoke as if it was the easiest deal possible. Jill didn't disagree either. She didn't care much about the trial, but returning safely was something she needed. She wondered why the creature would even need to make the deal though. It had more than enough power and time to just take them if it wanted. There had to be some purpose to her receiving it this way. It didn't matter much, since Luke would just be able to heal it later. It's not like losing an eye would affect her much either way. Her skills worked regardless of the quality of her vision. However, Jill didn't immediately agree. There was something to this deal that felt wrong, and she hesitated despite how nice it sounded. She needed to know that the creature would be genuine, although her instincts told her that the creature was being honest. "I can't trust you." Despite her position, Jill felt no reason to let this creature get what it wanted. It wanted Jill to agree to this deal, but she wouldn't do it without absolute certainty. She didn't want to make a mistake. She waited to hear how the creature would reply and noticed one of its eyes twitch at her remark. "I cannot speak a lie, nor do I have any reason to. If you wish to make a bond, then we may do so." It sounded offended initially, but the tone quickly shifted to a more neutral one after a moment. It no longer sounded as amused as it had been, and Jill took that as a good sign. Whatever a bond was, it sounded like it would bother the being. That was enough at the moment, and she agreed with a simple nod. The creature brought out its hand and held it towards Jill. As she made the motion, the shackles that had bound her broke. Or rather, they dissolved into the air as flecks of light. Jill tried to push herself into a sitting position but didn't manage it on her first attempt. Her body felt weak. Honestly, she didn't think that this could happen considering her stats, but it seemed like it hadn't helped much. However, just being able to move her arms and legs meant a lot. She took a second to gather her strength and dragged herself over to her items. The other being just looked in curiosity. Jill didn't care as she arrived at her pile of items. She grabbed the storage item and immediately took out some food. It was the highly nutritious juice they got in the previous dungeon. It was endless, and she drank until she was satisfied. The greater being seemed to have run out of its patience. "Do you agree?" "Yes." She only spoke a single word, but it was a difficult one to say. This creature had quickly become the object of her hate, and agreeing to whatever it wanted, felt profoundly incorrect. Still, it was the only way she could see to get out of the dungeon without dying. She agreed against all better reasoning with the monster. She couldn't see any other way out of the situation. The monster seemed distinctly pleased, as it lowered its hand once again. Even though the shackles didn't reappear, Jill felt her body freeze. As if it were stuck in a mold, she couldn't squirm in the slightest as the creature's nail dug into her skull. Jill screamed, but the sound was muffled, and she sounded like a restrained animal. Even though it was painful, it didn't compare to the pain she experienced the past few days. She slammed her mouth shut, her teeth hitting one another roughly. Keeping the pain out of her face, she forced herself to smile, refusing to give the creature any more satisfaction. The creature eventually dug out the eye, and Jill felt something else. It felt like when Luke healed someone, and she had an idea of it was. The bond, whatever it did, had been given to her. Was it like the marks that Mash received, or was it something more? She didn't know enough about what a being like this was doing that she couldn't know if there was any way to resist it. Without hesitating in the slightest, she checked her status. She hoped to gain some information on the bond and know what it meant. Hopefully, figure out a way to use it for her benefit. Name, Jill. Class, Ambitious High Fairy. Level, 100. Health, 247/1500. Stamina, 1234/1830. Mana, 2700/2700. Fortitude, 150. Endurance, 183. Strength, 115. Agility, 165. Intelligence, 270. Wisdom, 125. Charisma, 115. Free stats, 0. Skills: Eyes of a God, Spatial Manipulation, True Teleport, Threads of Time, Localized Time, Chosen by the Universe, Fey Empathy, Unnatural Charm, Combat Foresight, Temporal Reaction. Eyes of a God, active. You can use your mana to enhance your senses. Your manipulation of space and connection to the Fey let you see beyond the physical body. As a user of time and space, you can see beyond your realm and time. Spatial Manipulation, active. Manipulate reality itself, bend and contort it to your will. Space is the truest form of power, and you can alter it to your will. True Teleport, active. Any distance is merely an instant away. Move between the fabric of space. Mana cost varies on distance. Any teleport within your vision has no mana cost. Threads of Time, active. When looking at something, you can see that which it intersects within the shared connections of fate. See and understand the relationships that others would miss. Localized Time, active. Alter the time of your body, both able to speed it up and slow it down. Chosen by the Universe, passive. Reality itself is enamored by you. Time and space bend themselves to be more beneficial to you. Your magics come more naturally to you. Fey Empathy, passive. Gain an understanding of the emotions of those around you. As a Fey, you relish in the strong emotions of others. Unnatural Charm, passive. With a fairy's constitution, you gain beauty that humans could never compare with. An appearance that can truly never be disturbed. Combat Foresight, passive. Glimpse a moment ahead of your enemy. Learning of their next moves before they do them. Temporal Reaction, passive. Time slows for any attack that would otherwise hit you. Step into the realm of gods and react before they understand what has happened, escape almost every attack. Bond of the true God of Fey, having struck a bargain with a being of untold power, you siphon a portion of it to yourself. Although the sacrifice you have made is one of permanence, a true bond is inescapable. Trial of Advancement. Escape. Jill stared at the status for a second, just taking the time to accept what had happened. The information that her trial just wanted her to escape was ridiculous. Nobody could have escaped from a being like that. However, she paid little attention to that as her focus was on the bond. The bond might have been a mistake. Gaining a portion of the being's power sounded great, but it felt like something that meant that she would forever be inferior to it. Had she been baited into accepting? Before she could get another word out, the whole world seemed to flash, and she found herself outside of the dungeon. Chapter 192, Godly Advancement. Jill's first concern upon escaping was her appearance. She had been completely naked before the creature, and she immediately looked down in a panic. Seeing that she was fully dressed, she relaxed a little. It was a stupid concern considering everything that had happened, but she felt oddly embarrassed by the idea. Thankfully it turned out to be unfounded. She was back in the forest that had been just outside of the dungeon. It was quiet and she sat comfortably atop a field of grass. The night sky was illuminated by the moon. The image of the night sky peering between the treetops was beautiful, and she let herself just look at it for a moment. She raised her hand slowly, imitating a grabbing gesture at the moon above her. There was no meaning to the gesture, but it made her feel like she was really free again. Her body was feeling unnaturally good. It was almost as if nothing had happened. However, she could feel the pangs of hunger still, and a slight pain coming from where her left eye had once been. She had opened it by reflex and that only led to more pain. She would need to heal it but settled for keeping it shut. That was enough for the moment. She needed to wait for Luke. Rather than moving far away, she merely opened her storage space and took out the imitation of Priscilla. If Mash was done with his dungeon, then he would be able to find her. She didn't really want to be alone at the moment. No one else stood outside the dungeon, which was a fairly rare occurrence. She looked over her surroundings, teleporting into a tree that she could see. She landed awkwardly with one leg dangling over the edge. She should have stood up before teleporting, but it was too late for that now. She needed a distraction. The adrenaline and hatred that had kept her together in the dungeon were bleeding away, and she needed something to fill the void. The only memories she had of the past few days were bad, and she desperately wanted to avoid them. She focused inward, ignoring the fact that where she was sitting probably wouldn't be considered a safe location for it. Her consciousness drifted for a little longer than normal. She didn't know what the cause was, but it left her in anticipation as she appeared before the pillars of light. She froze upon seeing them. There were a lot, way more than the usual 3. She almost thought that something was wrong with her vision. It was a little blinding, and she didn't know what to do in this situation. There was probably around 100 pillars. Far more than she could even keep track of. She didn't know what to do in this situation. It would take a while to sort through this information. The colors varied drastically among the pillars too, and she just picked a random one to start with. It looked like she found her distraction. The pillar she chose glowed with an orangish light that seemed to be shifting unnaturally. It reminded her of a rope, though one that was made of fire. It was strange to see one like that considering how her abilities had nothing to do with fire. Her curiosity drove her to check it out first. She slowly hovered to it. Supernova Pixie, having brought about the end of a budding world, you are devastation made manifest. Your power to distort space is approaching the realms of gods. Irrevocably warps the world around you, become a visage of true destruction. Embody that which ends worlds. Jill stopped upon receiving the information. The class screamed power, and she almost picked it for that alone. Her revenge would require power above all else. However, she knew better than to rush a decision as important as this, and there were still more pillars to look at. She moved on to the next one, just continuing in a simple order after the first. She had a lot to check, and started forming a mental list of the viable ones. Even moving quickly, it would take around an hour to find the best ones. At the end of it all, she had made a list of 5 that she thought were the best. Mostly because of the implication behind them. She learned a few things after spending so much time in this place. It was surprisingly more physical than she had initially assumed. She had been able to move and dismiss many of the pillars, pushing them away from one another. The ones she had before her were fairly similar. The last pillar she had added to the list had been one that shone with a white light that seemed to want to overwhelm all the others. It was the biggest contender in her mind, but she checked the others first. This decision would be important, and she wanted to make it carefully. She went back to the first pillar considering it more carefully. It was the first one she had picked, and she had thrown it onto the list out of symbolism more than viability. She let the information flood her mind again. She had seen too many things to actually remember the details all that well. Supernova Pixie, having brought about the end of a budding world, you are devastation made manifest. Your power to distort space is approaching the realms of gods. Irrevocably warps the world around you, becoming a visage of true destruction. Embody that which ends worlds. The class was good, and it was a direct response to what she had done in the dungeon. It implied that she would get the power to do it again and on a much grander scale. When she had escaped the dungeon and met that creature, she realized just how small that power could be. While the class sounded powerful, it didn't sound like something that would help her kill that monster. Another problem with the class was that she didn't really understand what she had done to destroy that dungeon. The risk of doing something like that in this world was too concerning, and she didn't want to make it any harder. Plus, it didn't sound like something that would work well on a team. She moved on to the next choice. The pillar shone in a golden light, flecks of black dust spread throughout the pillar. It was an interesting color, and she had mainly been interested in it because of it. As she approached the pillar, the information appeared in her mind. Transcendent unbeliever, having transcended the realm of mortals, you have seen the cruelty of God. Those beings that were once mortal, no longer have the capacity to understand or remember what it means to feel. In your desire to surpass them, you forsake them. Resist their power and influence to challenge them as one of the few to resist the gifts that they can offer. The class sounded good, and would certainly help her in her vengeance, but there was another that was more tempting than this one. While this class sounded mostly focused on defense and self-control, it didn't evoke the same power as the latest addition to the list. She checked that one next, despite having it fresh in her mind. She wanted to compare the two that were extremely similar in name. The pillar was a pure white light that still felt like it was attempting to consume all the other pillars. The occasional burst of color rippled through the pillar, and she was mesmerized by the changing nature of it. God-killer unbeliever, a hunter of sorts, you seek vengeance against that which has wronged you. You are the mortal enemy of all gods, created from surviving the torture of one of those beings. Hatred fuels your strength, and anger hardens your will. Never accept any blessings from the beings, instead, you steal the power that you want. An unbeliever is able to warp any attempts gods make to restrain you. This class just seemed like an upgrade when she compared it to the previous one. Even now it still seemed more offensively oriented than it. Plus, the class resonated more with her current state of mind. She knew that classes could warp her mind, so picking one that was in line with what she wanted would be a good idea. The class also implied that it would warp the god's abilities, and she thought that it would offer her better skills than the previous one. Maybe even break the bond. The only problem with the class was the implications that it had in case anyone learned of it. While her friends probably wouldn't care, the general people wouldn't be so fast to accept it. Luke might care a little too, he was oddly religious at times. Although the Beastman god was a lot more accommodating than the ones she knew about. She considered her own faith for a second but knew that she wouldn't be praying to any god anytime soon. She left it alone for the moment and checked the next one. This pillar was pitch black, it was the only one that had been this color. As she moved toward it, she felt like it was covering her. It provided some warmth, a strange blanket made of the night sky. The information flowed into her mind, providing her with an unsuspecting coolness. Moonlight butterfly, having undergone a trial far beyond what is expected, you have broken through the cocoon of your world. Become something unbound by a single world. Traverse the stars, seeking change and evolution through breaking the boundaries of space. Through the manipulation of space and time, you are one of the few people who can truly search the unexplored valleys of the void. This class was different from all her others and was somehow equally as tempting as them. It was a way out. A way to forget everything that had happened to her and just explore. To go to places that few would ever get the opportunity to. It called to her more like something she dreamed of than wanted immediately. She rejected the class that promised her a way to freedom. More than freedom, she wanted revenge. Plus, she couldn't just abandon the others. If she was offered a class like this in the future, she might consider it then. There was only one class left, this one was the biggest contender to compete with the God-Killer Unbeliever class. This pillar was purple and flowed like a liquid. It seemed to warp the area around it. It was like her armor, but the effect was more significant. It was a struggle to approach the class, even within this space it seemed to affect the space around itself. The purple color got deeper as she approached it. The information flooded her mind eventually. Greater cosmic entity, space and time naturally bend around you. Creatures limited by the world around them could never hope to approach. Having gained power from God, you are mere steps away from becoming one yourself. The only equal to the gods is another god. The very essence of reality bends to shield you. Nothing can contain the presence of a budding deity. The class itself seemed to make her even more defensive. Also, it would probably eventually get her the power needed to fight against the monster. There were too many problems with the class though. It sounded like it would make it hard to interact with others if she took the class. Plus, it sounded like it would build on the power she had received from the bond. Gaining power that way didn't sound like it would be very helpful for her revenge. However, the class was still tempting. The idea of becoming something like that monster was revolting, but also enticing. Chapter 193, Legendary Skill, Jill. She experienced firsthand the kind of power a god had. It was overwhelming, especially when she considered how easily it had stopped her. For as much as her friends had joked about her relative invincibility, she was unable to do anything against that thing. Even with her teleports and foresight, she had little opportunity to make use of it. Ultimately, she decided against the class. One reason stood out more than the others. She fundamentally didn't want to become a being like that. Personal preference sounded like a bad reason to refuse a class, but it was enough for her. She moved away from the class, the pull it had feeling weaker now that she rejected it. She looked over the other pillars carefully, still a little uncertain about the choices. Breathing deeply, she made her decision and reached toward the white pillar. It pulsed gold moments before her hand touched it. Jill's eyes snapped open, and she winced as she realized that her left eye was still missing. She shut it again, lamenting that she didn't have a more perfect solution. Hopefully, Luke was done with his trial or soon to finish. She could purchase an eye patch but didn't fancy the idea of using one. For a second it sounded like someone was laughing at her, or was it trying to encourage her somehow? It almost felt like she heard something speaking as if it was trying to say to cheer up. Jill flinched hearing the sounds. It reminded her of her mother's voice but strangely even more condescending. That was a real accomplishment. The panic started soon after that thought. Her eye darted around searching for the source of the sound. After not finding anything in her vicinity, she decided to try a different approach. "Who are you?" If she could hear it, then the same was probably true the other way around. There was a long pause that made her doubt whether she had been hearing things or not. She was saved from her perceived insanity when she felt another emotional prod. It was definitely a mocking tone this time. It felt like she was being made fun of somehow. It was strange and she still didn't know where it was coming from. Thinking that it had to do with her class, she checked her status. Name, Jill. Class, Godkiller Unbeliever. Level, 100. Health, 1750/1750. Stamina, 2080/2080. Mana, 3200/3200. Fortitude, 175. Endurance, 208. Strength, 175. Agility, 265. Intelligence, 320. Wisdom, 175. Charisma, 145. Free stats, 0. Skills, Eyes of a God, Spatial Manipulation, True Teleport, Threads of Time, Localized Time, Chosen by the Universe, Fey Empathy, Unnatural Charm, Combat Foresight, Temporal Reaction. Eyes of a God Killer, active. You can use your mana to enhance your senses. Your manipulation of space and connection to the gods let you see beyond the physical body. As a user of time and space, you can see beyond your realm and time. Identify a god with a mere glance. Spatial manipulation, active. Manipulate reality itself, bend and contort it to your will. Space is the truest form of power, and you can alter it to your will. True teleport, active. Any distance is merely an instant away. Move between the fabric of space. Mana cost varies on distance. Any teleport within your vision has no mana cost. Threads of time, active. When looking at something, you can see that which it intersects within the shared connections of fate. See and understand the relationships that others would miss. Localized time, active. Alter the time of your body, both able to speed it up and slow it down. True bond of the God Killer Needle, active, unique, legendary. A legendary weapon, it has developed a semblance of sentience. The legendary needle was said to have been used to fight against the gods themselves. Threading the weaves of fate, it pierces through an opening within a god's future. Bend even the proclaimed immortality of gods. Teleportation marks, mark those you damage to know their location regardless of the boundaries of space. Similarly, mark allies to teleport to them. Removes the additional cost of teleporting marked allies regardless of distance. Reduces the cost of teleports when teleporting to a mark. Marks, 1/10. 1. Mash. Chosen by the universe, passive. Reality itself is enamored by you. Time and space bend themselves to be more beneficial to you. Your magics come more naturally to you. Fey empathy. Unbelievers understanding, passive. Gain an understanding of the emotions of those around you. As an unbeliever, you relish in the strong emotions of others, bolstering their individuality and strengthening their minds. Unnatural charm, passive. With a fairy's constitution, you gain beauty that humans could never compare with. An appearance that can truly never be disturbed. Combat foresight, passive. Glimpse a moment ahead of your enemy. Learning of their next moves before they do them. Temporal reaction, passive. Time slows for any attack that would otherwise hit you. Step into the realm of gods and react before they understand what has happened, and escape almost every attack. Unbelievers' resistance, passive. A god is a personification of its belief. You refuse to conform to those beliefs and resist the powers of such beings. Lesser beings fail to comprehend your strengths, let alone your weaknesses. Resist those who you can understand. Block up to 20% of an enemy's abilities. Bond of the true god of the Fey. Twisted brand of the God Killer, passive, unique. You have warped the bond given to you and stolen some of the god's power. Having learned the skill from a god, you can use it to siphon a portion of a god's attributes, gaining 1% of the god's highest attribute. Jill almost fell out of the tree when she learned of the stat change alone. How many had she gained? The amount seemed ridiculous. She was overwhelmed just thinking about how much her stats had improved, but the skills were even more daunting. 2 unique skills, and one that was legendary as well. What did that even mean? A legendary weapon, how did she wind up with that? Did that make her a hero? After panicking a little at seeing that, she realized what she had been hearing earlier. Her mind drifted to her other unique skill. That probably had been what improved one of her stats, though she had no idea about which one. The fact that it was just a single % showed just how powerful a god was. For her, the stat gain had been enormous regardless of which one was affected. The god probably wouldn't even notice an increase like that. After checking out her unique skills, she turned to the others. There were 2 new normal skills. The first of which was by far the more interesting one. The other was just a general defensive skill, but the teleportation marks sounded extremely useful. She froze upon seeing that Mash was marked for some reason. Did it automatically mark her friends? Then what about the others, did that mean that they were dead? She was worried for them. Without a second thought, she attempted to teleport to Mash. It drained a large chunk of her mana, and she had a feeling that she wouldn't be able to manage it without her new mana reservoirs. In an instant she was looking at the night sky, then she was somewhere else entirely. Mash sat on the ground before him, and she noticed an enormous tree jutting from the ground in the distance. A grassy plain separated him from the large tree. Jill couldn't help but stare at the tree for a moment. It was the biggest thing she had ever seen, even when she compared it to the god she had met. Jill? How did you even? Jill's mind raced through man-things as she heard Mash. Her first thought was worry that she ruined his trial. Then everything that had held her together just kind of broke. It's like seeing one of her friends had broken the thin threads she had been using to keep herself sane. Then she noticed Red standing not too far from Mash. He rose to his feet as he spoke. It was more of a jump as he was surprised by her sudden arrival. Jill felt tears appearing in her eyes, and she didn't stop them as she jumped at Mash, pulling him into a hug. He couldn't even finish what he was trying to say. Red took a step closer, and Jill grabbed her too. She pulled both of them into a tight hug and cried her eyes out. Strangely, it was Mash who returned the hug. She felt his hand land on her back. Red just went stiff, her body almost shaking. She was obviously not used to doing something like this. Jill was fairly surprised to see that Mash was able to hug her back. She would have expected him to do something awkward or stiffen up like Red. Despite crying herself, she was surprised when she noticed that Red was too. Her shaking had been from her sobs, not her discomfort. Her tears were red like blood. After crying for a little bit, they separated. Mash awkwardly sat down, his back landing against a nearby tree. Red similarly sat down, though she sat in a much more proper manner, with her legs tucked beneath her. Jill just plopped on the ground, her legs crossing on another. The others' expressions were mixed, and she knew that she would need to explain a lot. I think we have a lot to talk about. She started her explanation, telling them everything. She didn't want to hide the events, and it felt like she needed to share. Her experiences poured out of her, starting with her time spent in the forest to how she broke the world. The way she met with the god, and the torture. It was a struggle to explain that, but she felt better afterward. Her friends shared her anger, and that was a scary expression on both their faces. Red's skin was strangely grey, and there was a new mark beneath her right eye. It was like a streak of red blood that matched her earlier tears. Her blood-red eyes were more sunken now, and her expression looked fiercer for it. On the other hand, Mash's face changed very little, but his eyes were filled with rage. She could understand what he was feeling. Unbeliever's understanding was probably letting her notice the signs. He was furious, and she felt like he would attack the god right now if given the opportunity. Red took a little while to catch her breath. She had cried just as much as Jill had. After Jill finished her retelling, Red started with her own story. It surprised Jill to hear what had happened, but now she understood why she thought that Red looked conflicted prior to another dungeon. However, Jill was sure how to feel about the situation. It was complicated. Red had made a decision, and one that had led her to a path of death. Jill was fine with that, as she knew that Red was regretting it. The problem is what happened after that as a result. Mash had misunderstood the situation, and in saving her had killed innocent people. Even if the soldiers weren't completely innocent, they didn't deserve to die so quickly. When Red mentioned it, Jill noticed the change in Mash's emotions. Red's own mood had dropped too. She felt guilty, and Mash just felt disgusted. She could tell that their emotions were directed at themselves too. Jill didn't know what to say, and she wasn't ready to try and help others yet. Her own thoughts were a bit too dark for that. Instead, she tried to change the subject. A little uncertain about her choice of words, she tried to summon her weapon for the first time. Summon God-Killer Needle. Chapter 194, Needle with an Attitude. As she finished speaking, she felt something prod at her thoughts. It was a rejection of some kind, and followed up by an unsatisfied feeling. Did the weapon not like what she said? Is it invisible? Mash sounded completely genuine with his question, and that made the situation far more embarrassing. Jill's face heats up a little, as she shook her head. No, it wasn't satisfied with the words. Got any ideas? From the side, Jill heard Red start to laugh. The sound seemed to lighten the heavy air that had been building. It was a little surprising to hear her laugh like that, but it was also something that they needed to hear. After getting her laughs out, Red's expression became more natural, and it seemed like a lot of her tension had bled away. Jill could still feel the guilt surrounding her, but it seemed like she was doing better. Mash's voice brought her attention around again. I don't know, try something grandiose. Jill took the suggestion in hand and spoke up with a sarcastic tone. One obviously meant in a mocking way. Oh, grand god-slaying needle, I call upon you great power. Manifest before me and display your resplendence. She couldn't even say the words without grinning but felt the mana drain from her. It drained a decent amount, and she felt it all forced into the space in front of her hand. It seemed to coalesce from the space itself. The place in front of her hand warped like it did when she used her spatial manipulation. The blade formed, a long thin needle of pure white. It almost seemed to be made of bone. It had a small ring at one end as if it were a sewing needle. Although it was a lot longer than one, easily surpassing even a long sword. It was closer to a quarterstaff if she considered the length. At the ringed end, she saw that a thread was looped through it. It was red string and she noticed that it was connected to her. It felt like it was connected to her, and she felt like she could change her future by using the item. She had this instinctual knowledge of how the item worked. The weapon's thoughts and emotions became clearer now that they had manifested. She understood that it hadn't liked her summoning but didn't want her to embarrass herself further. The information she had gained told her that she wouldn't need to say anything so grand to someone with the weapon. The key word that she needed to use was manifest. The fact that it was so long made it a little cumbersome to use, but she guessed that some practice would make it a lot better. In fact, she realized that part of the knowledge she had gained included an idea of how to utilize a weapon like this. It seemed to almost rely on the user being able to teleport as she could. More out of curiosity than anything else, she tried to bend her own fat and see what would happen. Unsurprisingly, nothing noticeable happened, though the weapon gave off a feeling of contentment. Since the weapon looked like something meant to weave with, she tried doing exactly that. Mash, I'm going to try something. Try not to do anything crazy. Mash was an interesting case, as after getting his mark his fate was unreadable. To her eye it looked like all of the strings that would normally connect him to other things were just wrapped around him tightly, like a ball of yarn. Seeing it that way, she tried to weave one of those threads with her own, curious to see what would happen. Mash looked nervous, but did as asked and remained perfectly still. After feeling the weave settle in place, she turned toward him. Do you feel any different? Mash shook his head and took a step forward. Then, almost inexplicably, he slipped, tripping over nothing and falling towards Jill. For the first time in a long time, Jill felt like she was unable to move out of the way, and her attempt to do so caused her to stumble as well. Mash crashed into her, and they both fell to the ground. The side of Mash's head landed on her thighs as she also fell onto her ass. She quickly pushed him off, feeling surprisingly embarrassed at what had just happened to her. What just happened? After she pushed him away, the weave she had made fell apart, and their fates were no longer connected like that. Red looked on in interest, and Jill began explaining what she did. She talked quickly and a little stiffly. Hiding her embarrassment was hard, and she hoped that the weapon would be enough of a distraction. She continued to mess with it for a little bit but avoided doing something like that again. Mash p.o.v. Mash looked at Jill, who looked slightly different. The missing eye was one thing, but he was more surprised by the faint glow her skin gave off. It was almost unnoticeable, but the hug earlier had let him see it. Her explanation of what had happened, and her trial were alarming to say the least. He was angry, and despite her attempts to distract him, the anger didn't fade. He could feel it, softly stirring within his mind. He also came to realize a few other things. His trial was almost easy when compared to what Jill had to do. Also, he should have checked his status to see if there was any information in there. It seemed like a person's performance in their trial affected how many options they would receive. It probably meant that he could have done more during his own trial. If he had completed more battles and fought for longer, he probably would have been offered more classes like Jill had. She had told them about how many different classes she had needed to sort through. It made him regret his decisions a little, but he was happy with his class. Although he guessed that one of the other ones he had been offered would have given him more. Jill had gained a lot of stats from her selection, and that made him wonder if he had really made the best choice. They had decided to rest in the relative safety of his world for the moment. Jill wanted some sleep, and Red was just as eager. Mash wasn't really tired. After they had all shared their experiences, Mash had grown increasingly worried for Luke. He couldn't convince himself to sleep just yet. He believed that Luke would succeed, but he wished that they had spaced out their trials. It would have been the smarter move, that way they could have passed information to one another. It might have given him the knowledge he needed to get a class as good as Jill's. He dismissed the thought, knowing that there was no point in regretting his decision now. He had plenty of other things to regret. How many beastmen had he killed? How many were injured? He wanted to go back and apologize, but he knew it would be empty. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because he knew that he would have done the same regardless of knowing the background. At that moment all he really cared about was saving Red and venting his anger. Even if he knew that Red was there to assassinate Ellis, he still would have reacted the same way. He was still coming to terms with that as well. Her family was comprised of well-trained assassins, criminals who were literally meant to kill people. Even if she did it with the backing of the king, it wasn't something he could fully understand. It was one thing to say that he forgave her, and another to truly accept it. However, she was his friend, and he would be able to forgive her based on her future decisions rather than on something she regretted. He was distracting himself from his own actions. Though he knew that was wrong. He couldn't push the blame on anyone else. Hesitating a little he checked his status, trying to get an idea of how many people had died. Name, Mash Stell Lumber Class, Chimeric Vagabond. Level, 100-102. Health, 3000/3000. Energy, 3560/3560. Fortitude, 300. Endurance, 186. Strength, 250. Agility, 252. Intelligence, 221. Wisdom, 110. Charisma, 100. Free stats, 020. Checking his status, Mash knew that he had probably killed more than just a handful of people. Especially, if all the people he had killed were lower than his level. He had only done a single attack, but it had done a lot of damage. The impact alone had killed someone, and the rest of his attack had been indiscriminate. The power of combining those forms was incredible, and he knew that he could have gone even further. What would have happened if he mixed all of his forms together? How would that even look? It was something he would need to test, although this wasn't the right moment for that. You, okay? Jill appeared beside him, and Mash was surprised to realize that he had followed her movements the whole time. He knew when she woke up too. His new domain somehow let him understand when and where she was teleporting to. With his senses, it just seemed like extremely fast movement. Jill sat there beside him, and he tried to maintain his expression. Her eye was a little different. Rather, her gaze had shifted and gained a coldness that she hadn't had before. When she arrived, she accidentally opened both her eyes and quickly shut the one that was missing. I guess, how about you? She shrugged her shoulders, the flow of her skin seeming to linger after her movement. She glanced at her own aura but responded quickly. I still hurts a little. Luke just had to be the last one to finish. Jill tried to joke about it, but Mash picked up on the slight hesitation in her voice. She was probably worried about Luke, and he would be lying if he said he felt any different. The trials seemed like they could be anything, and Luke might have gotten something particularly bad. Within his domain, he could tell that Red was awake, though she only moved now. She turned towards them, rising to a seated position. They weren't far away from one another as it was just smarter to remain within his domain. With Priscilla in the domain, he could watch their surroundings even if they were all sleeping. We should probably go to the dungeon. We can wait for Luke. Mash nodded along, agreeing with her. She had spoken with her usual tone, but she looked like she didn't have a restful sleep. The fact that she had gotten any sleep was good. He couldn't even manage that much at the moment. I can teleport us there, just need to figure out how to give you all marks. How did you get it, Mash? Jill's question got Mash to think about the moment, and he scratched the back of his head as he tried to explain. It was like I got asked if I wanted it or not. It felt like it was your mana, so I just accepted it. He knew that what he had done probably wouldn't be considered very smart. Red's response only seemed to prove that. Yeah, I got something like that too, but I didn't accept the unknown power that had just appeared. I'm guessing Luke did the same. How did you send it to us anyway? Jill shook her head left to right. No idea, it just kind of happened when I got the class, and Mash, have you seriously not learned your lesson? Didn't you just tell me how you almost got tricked by a demon? Mash didn't have a response for Jill and just looked away. His gaze drifted up towards the enormous tree. He opened his storage space and pulled out his bottle of ever-filling juice. He took a long sip in order to avoid any kind of answer. He remembered why he had accepted, it was mostly because he figured he could just remove it if he wanted to. Or rather that he would just be able to resist it if it was bad. A touch of nothingness sounded like it would prevent something like that. Although, he could admit that he was probably being too arrogant and for no good reason at that. Chapter 195, Weed Whacker. Mash p.o.v. Just try and use it like your other skills. Red held out her hand to Jill, her fingers pointed toward the ground. She had probably done it unintentionally, but Mash couldn't help but smile at the overly proper gesture. Jill took it step, bowing deeply before grabbing her hand. Of course, my lady. I will do my very best. Jill lightly kissed Red's fingers, causing her some genuine discomfort. She was probably embarrassed, but it was hard to tell with her grey skin. Jill seemed to enjoy it though. A second later Jill's hand glowed vaguely purple before the color seemed to transfer over to Jill. Within his domain, Mash was able to see how it melted beneath her skin, much like Luke's abilities. Jill paused, probably checking her status before speaking. Well, it looked like it worked. Give me a second to recover some mana, then we can go. Mash was glad to see that they were relaxed enough to joke, but he was still worried about Luke. He kept his thoughts to himself, wanting to let them recover a bit. While he felt bad about the people that he had killed, his experience didn't compare to theirs. Jill was literally tortured, and Red was just not in a good state of mind. In her recollection of the past few days, he could tell that she had been spiraling downwards. Those things wouldn't vanish. He knew just how long an action or decision could cling to someone. He sat and waited for Jill to recover. It felt like he had been waiting for hours, though it was at most half an hour. His anxiety just wouldn't let him stop thinking about what kind of situation Luke would find himself in. Luke p.o.v. Luke stretched his back out. His palms placed against the middle of his back as he arched it as far as he could. He considered just healing things like soreness, but had come to enjoy the feeling of the work. The steady work had let him build a refreshing sheen of sweat, and he had even built up some muscle. After spending so many days in constant fighting, he forgot that consistently training could still improve the body in other ways. Things like muscle definition and physical appearance could be changed without the need of gaining stats. Mash was actually a good example of this. He had spent years exercising constantly, and his body was weirdly muscular despite not having the same bulk that someone with his stats might have. In these past months of working as a farmer, he had built the kinds of muscles that were visible. Now he seemed much more like some of the adventurers he had encountered before. Even Mash's brother was bulkier than he was lean. This trial was extremely strange. It had him working as a farmer during most of his time here. There had only been a handful of monsters and nothing that was particularly dangerous. The hardest thing about the dungeon was figuring out what it meant by expanding his territory. At first, he thought he would need to build things, but found that farming worked just as well. Plus, it was easier to just plant random seeds around the main building, rather than trying to build something complex. He had even found some seeds within the building itself. The fields outside of his mansion were large and open, and it had taken him months to properly set it up for farming. Plus, finding a source of water had been annoying, and he had wasted a week just looking for that. He had kept track of time to the best of his ability, but it was hard after the third month had passed. He looked over his progress, heading to the outskirts of his land as he felt something approaching from the distance. The plants were finally growing, and he looked over them as he moved. It was a weirdly thorny plant that sprouted two red flowers that were opposite from one another. The stems were completely grey too. It was the first time he had seen or smelled a plant like this. They smelled amazing, like the sweetest fruit imaginable, and he wondered if they would eventually produce fruit themselves. He had tried eating one before, but it didn't really have any flavor. It had also stained his fingers and lips red. The color stuck for over a week, and he had felt like he was wearing makeup. He had been careful about collecting more seeds after that day. As he approached the edge of the farm, he looked into the distance. The monsters always came from within the forest outside of the grassy plains, and they seemed to target the flowers. There had been a few varieties to the monsters that had shown up, though they only ever came alone. Last time had been some kind of wolf, which he had managed to kill easily. He looked into the forest as a bat-like monster charged from the cover of the trees. It was easily as big as he was, and its wingspan made it seem a lot bigger. Its body was strangely proportioned, where its legs were bigger than normal. Each clawed talon was half the size of its wing. He had fought one of these before and knew how to beat it. It rushed him quickly, moving faster than he would normally be able to keep up with. He didn't worry about it too much, letting his buffs boost his stats. After which, he further increased his defenses by using soul manifestation around his whole body. A golden spectral body superimposed upon his own. The monster's clawed feet crashed into the manifestation, digging into it as it thrashed around. The monster didn't have eyes but had a large mouth that screamed continuously. Luke didn't know why they continuously screamed as they did, but the sound was loud enough to damage his ears. He wondered how the creature wasn't harming itself considering the large circular ears it had. Luke managed to take the brunt of the blow and didn't hesitate to reach within the creature. He felt his hands grip something within, and he pulled out the monster's soul. The power filled his body, but he didn't hold it for long, releasing it and providing salvation. He took a deep breath, releasing his skills as the monster's body went motionless. He would bury it properly later, but for now, just needed to gather himself. At first, he had tried fighting the monsters without targeting or removing their souls, but they seemed to resist all other types of attacks. He simply couldn't produce enough power to damage them without taking their souls, and he come to accept his role. While stealing a person's soul was problematic, he had come to understand what the value of his skills was. He could kill things and then free their souls. The death he provided was true, and he was slowly accepting the idea of ferrying souls to their next destination. He wasn't hoarding them for power, and the stats he gained from doing this weighed on his mind. Even if he wasn't holding the souls, he still felt bad about stealing some of the stats that they had worked to achieve. It was too easy, and compared to the work he did on the farm, left him very unsatisfied. He hadn't gained any new skills or abilities. The dungeon had been going on for a while, and he wasn't really sure about how to finish it. He wondered what the others were up to. He kept thinking about them, but his habit of searching for one of them had passed. It wasn't that he stopped caring, but spending months away from them had let him think about a lot of things. He had become dependent on them to the point that it was probably unhealthy. He couldn't really remember when he last pushed for something that he really wanted to do. Ever since Crawl, he had felt like his decisions would lead to disaster. Even now, just remembering Leah would bring up some bad memories. As his thoughts were drifting, he felt the approach of another creature. It was a strange feeling, like something was alerting him. It wasn't like Mash's domain where he could see the creature, but instead, he had a feeling of its approach. It was like the house was warning him. He didn't let it bother him, accepting that the house was somehow alive. He walked over to the opposite end of town, surprised to see Jeffrey standing there. After he had claimed the house, he had met this man. The faceless monster he had seen by the house's entrance turned out to be a ghostly servant to the building. Luke had decided upon his name and had set him to help with some easy work. Despite having a personality and some intelligence, Jeffrey felt like a puppet. Something like Mash's wooden versions of Priscilla. This man seemed to be like that, though one made of flesh. Just like all of the monsters he had seen thus far, Jeffrey didn't have any eyes. His face was just a mass of smoothed skin, the only opening was for a mouth. The strange being had many extra teeth, and he had a very unnatural smile. Luke focused on Jeffrey's otherwise human body, as looking at his head was freaky. "Why are you out here?" Luke asked the question, speaking with a familiar tone. Spending months with a completely obedient creature would do that. "Good afternoon, sir. I have come to inform you that this next opponent will be the end of your trial. It has been lovely to work with you, and I wish you the best of luck." After saying his piece, he bowed and started walking back toward the house. Luke didn't know how to feel about the exchange. On one hand, he was glad to be done with the trial, but on the other, he heard the strange somberness in Jeffrey's voice. It sounded like a final farewell, and Luke couldn't help but wonder if that was because Jeffrey thought that he would succeed or fail. After spending so much time on his own, Luke regained some of his confidence and took a few deep breaths as he waited for the monster to approach. His heartbeat quickened, and he could some tension in his shoulders. Despite how easily he handled the previous monster, he felt some fear as he waited. He hated these creatures, not because of their strength but because of their disturbing appearances. Living beings should really have eyes, and he had several nightmares about losing his own. He really hoped that something like that never came to pass. He shivered a little, and briefly considered his plan. He would probably try another attack like he did with the bat. The monster that came out of the woods was different from the previous one. It had eyes, which would have been relieving if not for the fact that the monster had no skin. It looked like a skeleton, with human eyes jammed into its sockets. At that moment, he decided he would have preferred a creature without any eyes. "Who do you think you are to encroach on my domain?" The skeleton's mouth didn't actually move, but the voice was obviously coming from it. It was loud too, as if the creature was shouting. The fire behind its words revealed its anger. Luke was busy trying to process the fact that it could talk. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean. I am here for my trial, it told me to expand my territory." The being paused, then used its hand to adjust its eyes to look at Luke. It was strange seeing a skeleton's bony fingers turn its own eyes. Even without moving, Luke could somehow read the change in its expression. It had shifted from being openly hostile to gaining a curious glance. "Oh, a new lich and one to climb so high. It has been a long time since another lich had been born. Let alone get to the level 100 trial. Tell me, boy, how you avoided the gaze of the king." He had been quite active in his hunt of our kind. Chapter 196, Lich. The hairs on Luke's back stiffened as he was called a lich. The being started walking forward again, but Luke could barely move. Now he had an idea of what exactly was before him. It was a real lich, or a former one at the very least. He didn't know what to do, and his first thought was to run away. To grab his key and flee, but he couldn't bring himself to run. To be a coward against a being that he was predestined to meet. He had no doubts that he would fight a lich one day, and he didn't like the idea of running away now. It would be something he knew that he would regret, so he found himself resolved to the battle. He braced his feet on the ground, choosing to remain silent. He didn't want to answer the being before him and instead chose to let his buffs wrap around his body. The stat boost would be needed. The lich noticed and he started laughing. It started soft but quickly turned into one of complete instability. It echoed weirdly considering where he was, the sound seemed to make his bones vibrate. "You think you can fight me? Foolish child, come and accept your death. I will grant you a place within my legion." Finishing his dialogue, the lich raised one hand toward Luke. While the lich was preparing its attack, Luke let his soul manifestation cover his body again. Golden light showed from him as his body was reinforced by the skill. He wanted to defend himself since he assumed that the creature would target his soul. The golden body surrounded him. The lich's skill was something that Luke should have expected, but he was caught off guard as skeletons rose from the ground. These didn't resemble humans but were closer to the creatures he had killed earlier. He could see the folly in his previous actions immediately. The dungeon was connected, and the monsters he had killed were coming back to bite him. He bet that if he had burned or destroyed the bodies, then he wouldn't be dealing with so many corpses. The lich's summons was slow compared to their original forms. However, he had the feeling that he wouldn't be able to beat them in the same way he had before. These creations wouldn't have a soul for him to target, essentially nullifying most of his skills. His best bet was to deal with the lich himself. Luke charged forward, his soul manifestation left large tracks on the ground, as he ran like a charging beast. The lich's skeletons couldn't withstand Luke's charge, but they did slow it down. The lich reached toward Luke with both its hands. Luke turned his head downwards and thrust his shoulder towards the lich. It was a simple tackle, but he put all his weight behind it. Shock spread across Luke's face as he collided with the lich. The lich was strong, unusually so, and it actually managed to stop him in his tracks. The second thing that surprised him was how large the lich was. It was hard to tell earlier, but now he noticed that the man had been over a foot taller than Luke. The lich wore thick black robes, and Luke watched as they had wrapped around the skeleton's legs. They bent in a way to replicate muscle, and Luke realized that it felt like skin too. Did the man turn his body into a cloak? Was that something a person could even do? The very thought of it made him want to vomit. He kept it inside though and swung his fist at the man's rib cage. The lich caught Luke's blow in one of its hands and then its whole body glowed with a dusky black shade. A moment later, Luke felt his soul being pulled. It was the same thing he had done to other creatures, and he was shocked by the pain that ran through his body. It felt like there were strings being tugged on, and each pull dragged his insides out. Luke resisted and noticed that he could pull back. Fear and instinct drove him to do exactly that, and he pulled on the lich's soul in retaliation. He remembered having a similar fight before. The monster in that orphanage had done something similar, though it hadn't been trying to take his soul, so much as destroy it. Luke realized that he could mix the two techniques and started twisting the lich's soul as he pulled. The lich had looked amused by Luke's initial attempt, but that quickly warped as it let out a scream. The skeleton's mouth didn't move, but its eyes were extremely expressive. The sound seemed to come from all around Luke. It was something he needed to resist. The Lich's voice felt like it was bleeding into him. The Lich tried to pull away now, but Luke didn't let go. Even with his buffs and stats, Luke was physically weaker than the Lich. The monster raised his hand into the air, lifting Luke's body from the ground easily. It brought its hands down roughly, slamming Luke back first into the ground. Before the impact even happened, Luke started healing his body. The blow came, and the air was pushed out of his chest. He felt his back strain against the impact, but he kept his hands clutched around the Lich's forearms. The months he had spent fighting monsters revealed to him what kind of a fighter he really was. A prolonged fight wasn't actually to his advantage, even if he could heal. His skills were better suited to taking a hit in order to end the fight in a single attack. He would stick it out, and work through the pain. The Lich was probably in even more pain than him, at least, he thought that it was able to feel pain. However, it might just be putting up an act. Luke ignored the trick, he was focused on winning the fight and nothing else. You insignificant boy! You dare to steal the soul of a Lich! Know your place, unhand me! The Lich's words seemed to invoke a command in Luke, but he resisted the desire to follow the command. It was a charm skill or something similar, and Luke had a skill designed to prevent something like that from working. His hero's mentality was able to stop the Lich's attempts at controlling him, and Luke redoubled his effort to twist the creature's soul. The Lich slammed Luke against the ground again. For an instant, Luke's vision winked out as his head was slammed into the dirt. The crass couldn't soften the blow at all, and Luke was sure that his brain had been shaken. Thankfully, his vision returned though as his healing countered the damage. The pain alone was testing his will, but Luke kept his grip firm. The Lich's grip seemed to reach deeper, and he felt its bony hands around his soul. It continued to slam him into the ground. The grass and dirt were ground into sand from the force of the repeated blows. The Lich didn't only attack his body though and tried to tear his soul apart in the same motion. Luke resisted it, and golden fires started spreading from his body. The Lich seemed to genuinely wince when the flames started crawling up his arm. That reaction told him that he was doing something right. Mixing his techniques was working. Luke kept twisting the monster's soul. Any other creature would have died by now, but the Lich was somehow resisting him. Luke was able to see how similar their skills were. The Lich's body was obviously strengthened, and it had attacks that target the soul directly. Not to mention the way the robes seemed to reinforce its body was like an alternate form of his soul manifestation. Luke wouldn't be surprised to learn that this monster before him was once a beastman. One of the raised skeletons had recovered, and Luke felt a stinging pain, as something dug into his back. He could feel it boring through his ribs, and he cried out in panic. He didn't let go through, the pain only made him struggle more. Growing more desperate, he tried even harder to kill the Lich. More of the skeletons would arrive, and he knew that he needed to end the fight. He could hear the rattling of bones behind him. A cold wind spread across the area, it crashed into Luke's face, chilling his body quickly. It was colder than a winter storm, and Luke could feel the skin on his face harden. He countered the technique, his healing managing to counter the frostbite. It seemed like the Lich was emitting cold air from its body. It wouldn't have been a bother if his eyes weren't freezing just as rapidly as his skin. He had never known how painful it would be to have his eyes freeze. It was a mix of irritation and pain as his eyelids were cut when he blinked. Then something happened, and Luke felt a snapping motion. There wasn't a physical sound associated with it, but he knew that something had broken. Something deep within himself had been destroyed. In that same instant he was sent flying, tumbling away from the Lich. The skeleton behind him had exploded from the force of the throw, and Luke wondered what had happened. As soon as the tumble stopped, Luke raised his head from the ground to look at the Lich. The arm he had been grabbing was dissolving, breaking apart into ashes. Luke watched as one of his own hands faded, their color seemed to have been drained from them. Then understanding dawned on him, he had torn off a piece of the Lich's soul, but at the same time lost part of his own. What he had taken was more though, while all the Lich got was a single hand. Luke could see the Lich's soul. It was destabilized, like it couldn't maintain its form any longer. Luke tried to push himself off the ground, but his left hand was in excruciating pain. The limb had lost its color and had become hard like a stone. It also felt like something was driven into each of his fingers, and a stinging pain radiated up his arm. Luke tried to heal it, but he could do nothing. There wasn't anything there for him to heal. His soul was simply missing. The pain was affecting his movements, but he struggled to his feet. His soul manifestation was still working, and he managed to rise to a sitting position. He watched as the lich fled, running while his body was breaking. It had first been the arm, but now a section of the skeleton's side had dissolved too. Luke could feel the part of the lich's soul within his body. It was far larger than what he had lost. He considered it and then tried to mold it to alter it to fill the space where his hand had once been. Vaguely he remembered how the creature in the orphanage had combined souls to turn those people into monsters. The pain in his hand was growing worse, and he could feel it spreading up his arm. It was spreading, causing the rest of his soul to deteriorate. He needed to do something, otherwise, he was sure that his soul would break down like the lich's was. A soul was a single whole entity, it wasn't meant to be torn apart or warped like he was. Everything he had learned told him that the soul was the very basis for the body. It wasn't something that should be altered or messed with. He knew why people considered the soul a holy object. However, those thoughts didn't stop him. He knew that he needed to fill the gap that the lich had made, to restore his soul even if it was with another. It was possibly the most taboo thing he would ever do, but he barely hesitated. He would not die alone in this place. His friends needed him, and he planned on being there for them. Chapter 197, Grafting, Luke. He molded the pieces of the lich's soul, attaching them to his own. The process was horrible, not because of the pain, but the concept. There would be no forgiveness for the actions he was doing now. Everything he was doing would be considered among the worst villains in history. He considered stopping and sticking to his morals, but he was afraid and kept going. He didn't want to die, and that thought easily broke through his morals. His resolve was nothing compared to his fears. The lich's soul didn't match his, but he saw that there were a few similarities. He pulled on those similarities within himself, tearing the lich's soul into smaller pieces until he was left with something he felt like he could use. His arm began to change to heal, but not in the way he expected it to. It remained hard like stone, but golden lines grew over it, spreading across the whole hand as if it were tattooed heavily. Feeling returned to his hand, but the pain didn't vanish. He was left with a constant ache that was significantly better than earlier. Luke just sat there moving his stone-like hand. It almost sounded like it was cracking when he moved it. The pain didn't grow any better or worse, but it remained in a continuous state. The pain wasn't unbearable, it was like he had dozens of small cuts on the hand. Taking a deep breath, he considered what he had done, and found his thoughts drifting to places he didn't want them to. He needed to go after the lich, finish the trial and go see the others. He moved his arms beneath his chest, and pushed, trying to rise to his feet. A pain spread from his left hand, and he fell to his side. The pain wasn't all that bad, he just hadn't expected it. The stinging pain in his hand reminded him of his loneliness, though he didn't know why. There was no connection between the two things, but he couldn't stop the feeling from filling him. He would feel better with them around. Spending months by himself with nothing to do other than work had shown him just how much time he had been spending with the others. Almost every fun thing he had done in the past few months had been because one of the others pulled him along to do it. Thinking about it, he was like that before meeting them too. He tended to be a hard worker who rarely spent time just relaxing or playing. The only times he had ever done so was when his parents had pulled him away from doing work. He put his good hand on the ground, and only pushed himself to a sitting position, only to find that he was no longer within the dungeon. He recognized the location, though it wasn't what he expected. It wasn't the exit of the dungeon, but rather it was where he had been when he first arrived. The land he had farmed was gone, and the mansion was nowhere to be found. However, something else was in its place. It was a portal, a way out of the dungeon. He guessed that meant that he succeeded. The lich hadn't been able to repair his body like Luke had. That knowledge was somewhat reassuring. Knowing that the trial had ended was a huge relief, and he took a moment to just be glad that he survived. Afterward, he focused inwards, ready to accept his new class. His consciousness got carried away, and he could see 5 pillars before him. Briefly, he wondered why there were so many but decided to take it as an additional reward for clearing the trial. He was a little apprehensive of the pillars. Most of them radiated an aura of death that seemed to match the lich he had met earlier. Taking the creature's soul was probably influencing his classes. He just hoped that he hadn't tied himself down to becoming a lich. He had done what he felt was necessary but wondered if he had made the right decision or not. The pillars varied in color, but they were all tinged with a grey aura or section. There was one that shined golden and another that was silver. They were at opposite ends from one another, and he wondered if there was some significance to their position. Both of those didn't feel as ominous as the others. He decided he would check those first. The other three in the center felt like death incarnate. The nearest pillar was the silver one, and he gently drifted towards it. The light had a graying outline that seemed to match the Lich's soul. He tried ignoring it as he reached toward the pillar. Grafted Demi-Lich, having stolen a part of a Lich's soul, you gain a fundamental understanding of their abilities. The soul is something to be changed and altered. It is within your power to control and change the souls of others. Become an immortal being that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Warp your healing skills to ones of manipulation and control. Luke would be lying if he said that he didn't expect something along these lines. He had done something that had earned him this class, and he knew it. Even if he ignored the moral implications of choosing this class, there were a handful of other problems that stopped his selection. The class itself would be powerful, but he would lose his role within the group. Plus, he didn't want to become immortal yet. He wanted to be a few years older. As he thought about it, he realized that he probably wouldn't have that much of a choice. They had gained a lot of levels quickly, and he would probably reach the next advancement soon enough. The final part that he couldn't accept was losing his healing skills. They were the basis of everything he wanted to be, and he wouldn't sacrifice them. The group needed a proper healer, and he wanted to fill that role. He moved on to the golden pillar. It was at the opposite end of the pillars, but he didn't really want to check the death-coded pillars. They all felt like classes he wouldn't like, and he just checked the furthest one next. The golden pillar had what seemed like a strand of grey hair. It flowed through the middle of the light, almost as if it were stuck within a river. The information flowed into his mind. Grafted demigod, having unnaturally attached the soul of another to yourself, you take upon the burden of carrying the souls of others. Souls corrupted by the unholy powers have only one hope for salvation. Act as a vessel for carrying the souls of the wicked, granting them redemption through your own actions. Gain a portion of their strength as their soul passes through you. Repair people's souls, by sharing a portion of your own with them. As a god, your soul is infinite. Warning: this class will remove inherently unholy skills. His mind paused upon receiving the information. This was the first time he had ever even heard of a class coming with a warning of any kind. He felt like it was something that people would talk about. He wondered what the class meant by removing his unholy skills. Was it in reference to the skills he had stolen from the monsters? He knew that people would see something like that warning as a reason not to take the class, but to him, it was a huge incentive. To lose the skills that made him feel evil was something he never even thought was possible. Even if they had saved him against the Lich, he still thought he would be better off without them. Advancements were always better than their previous state, even if it wasn't a linear increase. The class had other things that interested him as well. From what he could gather, the class would be centered around working with souls. He would probably get attacks that targeted it, though not in the same way as his old skills. Plus, it mentioned that his soul would become infinite, and that sounded useful. If Liches and other beings could target his soul, having one that could handle the strain would be amazing. It felt like it would prepare him well if he ever fought against a Lich again. He had a feeling that he would eventually get that fight too. He realized that he had already convinced himself to pick the class, but he wasn't going to make such a rash decision and went to check on the other three. There was one reason he didn't want to the class though. It would set him up to become a god, and he wasn't sure if that was something he wanted. This choice would make him something that he couldn't understand. He didn't even know that getting something like this was possible. Sure, the others had guessed that it could happen, but he didn't fully believe it. He had more traditional beliefs, that the gods were predestined. It wasn't something that someone could stumble onto. Yet here he was with that very option before. Was this predestined? It certainly didn't feel like it, but he couldn't know. The other pillar beside him shone with a pale grey color throughout. It didn't seem to hide at all the aura of death it was producing. Still, he gave the class the benefit of the doubt and approached it. Death-wrought arbiter, a enemy of death, you have immersed yourself within its stench. It coats you like a cloak. The aura of death affects all around you. Bring about the death of your enemies, while knowing when your friends are near the edge as well. Take from them their death and carry it onto another. Death is a skill of balance, and you will maintain the equilibrium. To save one from the call of death is to condemn another. Luke frowned at the class. What had he done to earn something like this? He could only think of Red. He had saved her from death but had never considered what that would mean for something abstract like the balance of life. A class centered around keeping order didn't sound all that bad, but he didn't like the idea of trading others' lives for his friends. It wasn't that he couldn't do something like that, it was rather that he knew that he would. If he had the opportunity to bring them back or prevent their deaths by killing another, he would succumb to that temptation. His friends might hate him for it, but he knew that he would make that sacrifice every time. No, this was not a class he could pick. It would turn him into something he didn't want to be. Luke knew that he was a very selfish person, and his first concern was always to those closest to him. This class would give him an excuse to take that idea to an extreme. He moved on to the next one, not really sure he would get something better than the demigod class. This pillar was white with black stripes and looked almost like some kind of candy. He barely felt anything from the pillar and wondered if that meant anything. People have speculated on what the pillars could reveal about the classes, and he knew that it was a common belief that the stronger classes would feel stronger. The pillars on the edges certainly felt powerful, but it was simply too hard to know. He reached for the pillar, nonetheless. Chapter 198, Options, Luke. Luke didn't think that anything could compare to the demigod class, however, this next class was interesting. Mixed Soul Cleric, having combined your soul with an undead, you have gained the ability to change your race. Change between an undead and a beastman, gaining an additional class for each race. You are two individuals with a singular mind. Your power is divided, one a cleric of life, the other a cleric of death. Walk both paths simultaneously. This class sounded way better than he had initially expected. Plus, it was something he hadn't expected. The idea that a class would let him flip races and have access to another class entirely was crazy. It made him think about other people and wonder if anyone else had been offered something like this. Too many people kept the exact nature of their classes secret. Despite knowing the logic behind that decision, he wished he had more information on something like this. A class that offered him two distinct skill sets would make him far more versatile. However, he had some concerns. Mainly, he wondered how levels would work with a class like this. If the second class he got started at the beginning, then it would take a while for him to get enough levels to make it viable. Plus, it would probably mean that he would need to do twice as much work as the others for the same gains. While their group leveled quickly, he would fall behind if he needed to do twice as much work. That was the main reason he didn't see this class as something viable. He didn't want to become a burden to the others and make them feel like they needed to help him keep up. If he received a class like this in the future, he would consider it, but for now, it was not something he could take. He moved on to the final pillar, curious to see what it would be. Initially, he thought that all the classes in the middle would be evil considering the tinge of death that they all possessed. However, that last class was a viable option. More than that, he would have picked it if had more information on how classes like that worked. The final pillar showed entirely grey, and he had a feeling that it wasn't something he could seriously consider. The aura of death it released was the thickest one by far. It didn't have the same power as the demi-lich, the aura of death it had was colder. He reached for it feeling the information fill his mind. Cold Soul Pseudo-Lich, having mixed your soul with that of an undead, your soul loses the warmth of the living. It is a cold soul, one drenched in the river of death. Freeze the world around you, bringing the death of a natural disaster. The world freezes beneath your steps, and life chills in response to your magic. Contaminate others with the touch of your soul, granting them a life after death. The end of life is cold and unfeeling. Luke shivered, and not because of the cold nature of the class. He had thought that it felt different from the normal lich, and now he knew why. It was a pseudo-lich, something that straddled the line of being ethical. The class sounded like it would shift his focus, and probably grant him abilities related to ice and frost. He thought of Mash's brother and how strong he was. Getting skills to do something similar to him would be impressive, but he didn't think it was right for him. A class like that would be powerful, but it felt like he would be sacrificing his healing with this choice. That was a big reason to refuse the class. After Red's last advancement, he was the only one who could properly heal within their group. Mash could fake it with his mediation, but it was fast enough to replace the need for a healer. Jill suffered few injuries, but he knew that she was one mistake away from some serious damage. She would eventually run into something that restricted her movements, and he didn't think she would have any way to save herself. Her class was powerful, but he knew that hers was also one of the easiest to counter. Unlike Mash, she would suffer a lot more if her skills were sealed. Deciding that this class was not an option, he looked over the two he could still consider. Mixed Soul Cleric and Grafted Demigod, both classes were viable. He initially thought that mixed soul cleric was a bad choice, but he considered it again. The class could be incredible, especially if it meant that he would have double the stats of another. He could easily imagine how much of an advantage that would give him. The extra time to level would be annoying, but it was something he was willing to do. On the other hand, the grafted demigod was probably a lot stronger immediately. He wondered what it meant by grafted. Wasn't that something related to trees? It wasn't a big deal. Ultimately, his decision came down to one fact. Only one class mentioned healing directly. The demigod class was the only one to reference his ability to restore the others. That was his main role in the group, and choosing a class that didn't improve those abilities would be a mistake. His mind was made up, and he drifted toward the pillar. He couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. There was a responsibility associated with a class like this, and he wasn't sure if he could handle it. Moments before touching the pillar, he felt his heartbeat slow, and his breathing growed more relaxed. Something about the choice just felt right, and he reached into it without blinking. He opened his eyes and gasped. He could see something below him. It was a river of light that seemed to stretch forever. It flowed continuously, and he could picture it running across the entire world. It shone so brightly that he thought it would blind him. He looked away, and the light faded to nothing. Somehow, he knew what it was. It was where souls went before being carried to the afterlife. It existed at the edge of his vision, and he knew that he could see it whenever he wanted. It was just a matter of focus. If he wanted to see it, he could, but he could just as easily ignore it. That was exactly what he did, as he thought about the rest of his status. Name, Lucas. Class, grafted demigod. Level, 100. Health, 2600/2600. Stamina, 2000/2000. Mana, 3140/3140. Fortitude, 210/260. Endurance, 150/200. Strength, 190/240. Agility, 175/225. Intelligence, 183/314. Wisdom, 264/314. Charisma, 99/314. Free stats, 5. Skills, Soul Judgment, Soul Redemption, Holy Soul Manifestation, Visage of Demigod, Soul Enhancement, Soul Blessing, Restore Body and Soul, Soul Repair, Divine Soul Marks, Corrupt Distortion, Holy Soul Fire, Soul Grafting, Soul Shaping, True Holy Soul, Divine Soul, One in Mind and Body, Demigod's Soul, Untouchable Spirit, War Cleric's Bond, Hero's Mentality, Demigod's Mentality, Soul of Purity. Soul Judgment, Soul Redemption, observe and judge the souls around you. In judging the soul of those you vanquish, you act as a vessel to carry their souls to redemption. Send them to the river of souls and lead them to the afterlife. Holy Soul Manifestation, Visage of Demigod, let your soul manifest around you, shaping it and transforming your body to that of the gods. Transcend the limits of mortals. Soul Enhancement, Soul Blessing, improve their constitution and strengthen them. The bonus is improved based on their belief in you. Plus 0 to 200%. Restore Body and Soul, Soul Repair, heal people in their entirety. First, tear of a piece of your own soul, and use it to restore their soul. Shape a damaged soul, restoring their body of any wound. A perfect healing of both their soul and body. Divine Soul Marks, bless the souls you deem worthy. Improve their abilities while gaining them as well. Get a small portion of the benefit you provide. Grows with the person's belief in you. Plus 50 to 100% increase, you gain 1 to 5% of the power. Corrupt Distortion, stolen from a being of pure evil, you take its ability to crush and twist the soul, and as to be expected, the body will always follow the soul. Only affects creatures with a soul. Holy Soul Fire, stolen from a demonic being, your power redeems it, turning the demonic fire into a holy one. Burn the very souls of your enemies. Soul Grafting, unique whenever a soul passes through you, you take a portion of their power. Their souls are yours to graft. Any soul that passes into you will leave a piece of itself behind. Shape and warp the souls of others. Your power allows you to reach into the very nature of their existence. Gain 1/10 of the soul's lowest stat, and a glimpse into their experience. Soul Shaping, tear a piece of your soul off and manifest in reality. Shape it into anything you can imagine. Any creation will have durability equal to twice your fortitude. True Holy Soul, Divine Soul, passive a chosen soul of divine nature. It emanates with the power of gods. Resist any attempt to manipulate your soul. Your soul belongs to you and is protected by the very nature of the divine. Demigod's soul, passive your soul is infinite and repairs itself naturally. It can be further restored with mana. Repairing your soul heals your body. Your soul is balanced, all mental stats are now equal. One in mind and body, passive your soul has guided your mind and body to equilibrium. Raising your mental stats will partly increase your physical ones as well. 1/10 of gain. Untouchable spirit, passive your dedication is firm, and your path undaunted. War clerics bond, passive those you deem allies will be bonded to you. Cast your magic directly upon them from anywhere. So long as the connection is maintained, they are conduits for your magic. Hero's mentality, demigod's mentality, passive the chosen path of a god allows you to resist the temptation of evil. Gain resistance to any effects that would manipulate the mind or seal your skills. Soul of purity, passive your soul is pure and compatible with any other. Eyes of a demigod, see beyond the realms of a mortal. As a god of undeath, you can see the river of souls. See the passage to that which lies after death. Luke was overwhelmed with the information, and that was without considering the changes to his stats. His stat increases were unbelievable. He didn't know that skills that matched stats existed. However, it did make him consider what to do with his future levels. If he got something like this, wouldn't that mean it was a better idea to focus on a few stats exclusively? Everyone always told him the importance of balance, of keeping stats within a range of one another, but that seemed misguided now. He had a few things he wanted to test but left it alone for now. His worry for the others had returned, and he wanted to get out of the dungeon as soon as possible. He placed his hands beneath him, as he pushed himself off the ground. Feeling a lack of pain, he glanced at his left hand. At that glance, he realized something else. The skin on both of his arms had changed. They looked as if they were entirely made of pure white stone. It was pristine, and there were golden marks wrapping around his arms. It didn't quite look right as his normal skin color was on the darker side. Did gods have stone instead of skin? He should probably spend some more time learning about the gods when he had the chance. Either way, he was happy with the class and started walking toward the portal. Each step showed him just how much had changed. He felt different, and he could even recognize some of the differences. The most obvious one to him was the increased confidence. He felt sure of his decision with the class. The responsibility that had seemed daunting when he had first chosen the class was now something that he felt comfortable with. It felt like it was always meant to be. It was a strange advancement. He knew that classes affected a person's mind, but he didn't expect it to be so noticeable. Did it have to do with the nature of the class, or was it because he was looking for it? Either way, he wasn't sure how to feel about the revelation. He was curious to see if the others had experienced something similar. Chapter 199, Reunion. Mash had built a small camp for the three of them, as they waited for Luke to finish his trial. It had been almost 5 days since they arrived. The fact that Jill was able to teleport people across worlds was impressive. However, she had needed him to open a gateway for it to work. It seemed like she couldn't teleport out of a world if there was nothing connecting it to where she wanted to go. On the other hand, he could freely make portals to any world he had visited. Over the course of the past few days, he had been telling them of his trial and the world he had visited. He told them of how he had offered to help them deal with their invasion. Jill and Red didn't disagree either. Mash was somewhat eager to go back and try and learn the stuff that Daniel had done. The path sounded interesting, and he wanted to see if he could find one for himself. Over the past 5 days, they had been sparring a bit, and next, it would be Mash's turn again. They had mixed up how they were fighting. Jill mainly wanted to practice with her new weapon, and Red was trying to get her attacks to not be fatal. That usually meant that only Mash could spar seriously with Red since his meditation actually healed the damage from her attacks. He remembered when he had asked her to test it. She was pretty adamantly against it, but he got her to agree when he said that he could just cut off the limb and regrow it if he couldn't stop the spread. It didn't come to that, as his inhuman hibernation was more than enough to handle it. He got up, he was fighting with Jill next. They had agreed to use weapons and nothing else, as it wouldn't really be fair either way. If he mixed his forms, he could simply ignore the attacks from either of them. It wasn't that he didn't get damaged, it was rather that his natural regeneration would heal the damage soon after getting it. He had practiced a little and learned to take more specific abilities from his forms. Against Jill, he adopted the eyes and reflexes of his cat form. It was the only way he could keep up with her foresight. Jill had her weapon out and was waiting for him patiently. There was a strange glow to her eye whenever she fought him. She wore a bandage over where her other eye would be. It shone faintly red. The sight was a little intimidating, but he knew that he probably rivaled her in intimidating appearances. Apparently, the glow was instinctive, and it was strange because she didn't get that way when sparring with Red. They had managed a few spars although Red was restricted to defense. Red practiced moving her body freely as it was made of blood. Theoretically, she should be able to avoid any purely physical attack. Mash held his hand out in front of him, a wooden quarterstaff growing in front of him. He added a few enchantments to it, giving it durability and weight transfer. Those were his usual choices. He didn't need to shift to his treant form to make wooden creations that generated their own mana. It was something he could take from the transformation. Jill nodded once, signaling the start of the fight. Neither of them moved immediately. Jill's weapon was annoying. It somehow made them act in a certain way. It wasn't a mental skill either, it seemed to make them do something that they would have already done. The more he tried to be conscious of it and resist it, the more he ended up falling for its pull. It was especially strange since Jill didn't actually know how a person would react to the tug. Even worse for her, he was able to resist that pull somehow. Delay it or warp it to better fit his desires. He bet that it was his touch of nothingness. It was almost like his skill was still in the process of adapting. The more they sparred the more he was able to consciously resist the pull of her weapon. He wondered what the exact nature of his skill was. Jill moved first, jumping at him with great speed. She had gained a lot of agility and had actually surpassed his own agility. Normally that would make it hard for him to keep up with her, but her stats were imbalanced, and she couldn't fully utilize her advantage. His more balanced distribution let him make more use of all of his stats. Even without teleporting, Jill moved fast, and Mash saw the tip of her weapon approach him. Mash reacted, swinging his quarterstaff up to meet the coming blow. Jill shifted her whole body mid-strike to avoid his attempt to parry the blow. Her weapon just barely dodged his parry. An attack like that would have normally hit him, but he was getting used to fighting Jill and his improved reflexes let him match her movement. His staff stopped and swung sideways, colliding with Jill's weapon. He had a lot more strength than she did, and he easily pushed her attack to the side. Her whole body was sent flying, and Mash didn't let up, jumping toward her. He swung his staff in a downward strike as he got close. However, he swung at the empty air as he was slightly off with his jump. They were moving quickly, and he often had to commit to his attacks. She had twisted his fate somehow, forced him slightly to the left of where he intended. His staff connected with the ground, easily digging into it with the additional weight of the impact. It was significant enough that it barely made a crater. It just slid into the ground like it was made of snow. Within his domain, he could see Jill lunging at him with her weapon. The attack was aimed at his shoulder, though he managed to react to it. He let go of his staff with his left hand and raised his arm to push the needle. The sudden movement had surprised her, and she couldn't stop her momentum. The tip of the needle warped the space around it, and it pierced through the side of his palm with little resistance. However, there was some resistance, and he managed to deflect the blow. In the same motion, he moved his head a few inches to the left, narrowly dodging the tip without getting damage. With his injured hand, he turned it to grab hold of her weapon. It sent a stinging pain through his hand, but he was able to maintain his grip. He swung his other hand around, aiming for her thigh. He would need to slow her down. His swing met air. Within his domain, he could see her jump and land on top of her weapon. Her body was incredibly light, and he could easily handle the weight. As he felt her land fully on the needle, he swung it violently to the left, letting go of it and throwing her. She turned the momentum into a roll and rose to her feet. Jill wins. Red's voice came from behind him, and he let out a sigh as he fell back to the ground. Mash was getting better. He really thought he had her with that last attack, but it had failed as well. He looked at his hand, feeling pain spread across his entire arm. His hand looked like it had a chunk bitten out of it, though the wound was far smoother than a bite would leave. It simply seemed to erase the part from existence. It was strange because his natural defenses were able to resist the weapon. They guessed that there was a threshold that needed to be overcome for the erasing effect to happen. It was a weird weapon. He sat down to begin using his hibernation. The wound would heal, and it barely even hurt. Apparently, his last advancement had majorly improved his pain tolerance. He had always had a high tolerance, but now he felt like he could even ignore a missing limb. As the wound healed, he considered the spar. Jill had been winning most spars easily as neither Mash nor Red had been able to land a proper attack yet. That was usually how they determined the winner, though they would allow for a counterattack like Mash had done. Mash's domain was large, and he could easily look around the clearing. They were outside of the dungeon, waiting for Luke to finish his trial. Mash was increasingly growing more worried as the days passed. He practically jumped whenever someone had exited the dungeon. Sadly, every person who had come out had just been a false alarm. There was a pretty steady stream of adventurers entering and exiting the dungeon, and he had been surprised to see the consistency. Many people were taking advantage of the fast leveling that was happening. His hand was still healing, but he jumped to his feet as he felt someone leave the portal. It took a second to identify them, but he moved as soon as he realized who it was. Luke. Mash yelled the words, ignoring the group of adventurers who had been watching his earlier spar. The novices that arrived usually took the opportunity to watch their spars. It was annoying at first, but now he somewhat liked the attention. Plus, it wasn't like they were revealing anything important. They mostly just fought with their stats. As soon as Luke entered his vision, Mash began waving his hand wildly. He did it without thinking, and his hand sprayed blood across the ground. Seeing Luke had made him forget about the injury, and he brought his hand back quickly upon seeing the blood. Mash, what happened? Luke's words came out in a rush, as he took notice of the injury on Mash's hand. Luke approached quickly and grabbed Mash's hand. Mash felt something strange, and an instant later, he felt no pain from the wound. The healing had been so quick, that he barely even noticed Luke using any mana. If not for his domain, he probably would have missed it completely. Luke. Mash turned when he heard Jill walking up from behind. Her weapon was propped on her shoulder as one might do with a great sword. It was definitely long enough to act as one, but it was probably closer to a spear. The weapon seemed to be vibrating, and Jill's eyes were different. Normally looking into her eyes was like getting a glimpse into the stars. Now it looked like a single star, ready to erupt. They shone with a bright light that was tinged with red. Mash didn't know what was happening, but it felt like she was going to attack Luke. Instinctively, he moved to position himself between the two of them. Red was beside Jill and placed a hand on her shoulder. He could barely make out what she was saying. However, he understood the reasoning as soon as he did. Dismiss your weapon. Jill, do it now. Red's yelling seemed to get through to her, and Jill's weapon dissolved into the air. Mash knew that something was up with that weapon, and it looked like Red had made the right call. Jill's eyes stopped glowing, and they returned to their normal shade. Her whole body seemed to droop as she stared at her own hands. Mash didn't need to turn toward Luke to notice that he felt similarly down. He probably wasn't expecting that kind of a reunion. Mash sighed and saw Red do the same. It looked like they had a lot to talk about. Chapter 200, Influences. Mash closed the portal behind him. After they had found a secluded location, they went to his world. One reason was to show Luke, but it was also a good way to avoid any eavesdroppers. It wasn't that he expected a lot of disturbance, but Red had been a little paranoid since returning home. He didn't blame her considering what she had told him about her family. She would need to tell her story again, and he could see that she was not looking forward to it. He couldn't even imagine telling it once, let alone several times. Honestly, he didn't want to hear it either. It was a reminder of the people he had killed in his blind rage. Before they could get into any of their experiences, Mash wanted to know what had happened with Jill. It had felt like she was about to attack as if she was staring at her prey. He didn't need to ask the obvious question, as he could tell that Jill was preparing to explain herself. He just waited patiently as she figured it out. Luke, are you a god? Jill's question surprised him, though it looked like Red had expected as much. She barely even flinched at Jill's question. Jill even seemed to suspect it, and Mash felt like he had missed something. Luke looked a little different, having some of that unnatural perfection that he had noticed in those with a lot of charisma. Plus, his arms were weird, and they looked like they were made of stone. Even his eyes were slightly different, though he couldn't exactly place how. They looked normal, but they seemed to be reflecting a non-existent light. A demigod. Mash's careful analysis of Luke had not gone unnoticed. Luke started explaining what his class was and what it did. Mash listened with some curiosity and was surprised to hear that he had lost some skills with his class. He didn't think that was possible, but he was more surprised to hear of Luke's stats. Those were just crazy. Hearing the details of his class and thinking about what that meant in relation to Jill, he understood where the problem was. However, Mash had no idea how to deal with it. Do you feel the urge to kill one another? Red's question surprised Mash, and it took a second to process that she had really said it. After hearing Luke's story, that was the equation she decided to ask. He couldn't believe it, but he guessed that it was pretty important. Luke immediately shook his head. What? No, I didn't even notice something was wrong till I saw her eye. Also, let me heal that. Jill took a little bit longer than Luke to respond. She remained silent as Luke moved next to her and placed the palm of his hand against the bandage. There was a faint glow before he removed his hand. Once he finished healing her, she slowly removed the bandage. The bandage came off easily, and she looked relieved to have it off. Although, she was much weaker with a missing eye. It barely did anything to affect her fighting style. She opened her eye, to reveal a blank eye. Instead of matching her other eye, it was just an empty void. Her right eye looked like it reflected the night sky, dozens of tiny stars spread through it. Her left was empty, not a single star showing within the void of night. The contrast between the two eyes was strange. It wasn't in a bad way either. In his eyes, the stars in her right eye made the darkness of the left more pronounced. It worked both ways, and he thought that it was beautiful. It was that strange beauty that he couldn't quite describe. Still can't see. I should have expected as much. That damn god wouldn't bother giving me a wound like that if I could just heal it later. No, it was too cruel for that. When she spoke of that being, her true anger leaked into her voice. Her tone was cold and daunting. Her eyes didn't glow though, and he guessed that meant it was directly related to her weapon. She obviously wanted nothing more than to kill the thing. He wanted to help her get her vengeance too. Luke is not like that creature. Do you feel like you need to kill him too? Red's words felt overly harsh considering what had just been revealed, but he understood their importance. They had to know if Jill would go crazy and try and kill Luke. Still, Mash felt like that could have been handled more nicely. Not that he could think of anything though. Jill hesitated for a second, before finding the right words for her response. I don't know. It was like the needle knew, and I could tell that it wanted to be put to use. But it wasn't anything crazy. It's not like it was doing anything to me. It felt more like one of my siblings was trying to get me to do something. I could easily refuse, but it got all depressed when I did. It sounded like she wasn't sure, and her explanation didn't help all that much either. The whole group did relax a little. It sounded like there wouldn't be any major problems. Mash was grateful for how easy it was to work with Priscilla. He could only imagine how much of a headache it would be to have to deal with a weapon like that. Even his brother had mentioned how his weapon had been almost childlike in its nature. Were all legendary weapons just children? I have told you before. We are unified in purpose and mind. Doing such childish acts is beyond our bond. Even now our bond grows stronger. Your recent upgrade has let me speed up the production of more bodies. I will have another done by sunfall. Priscilla had been a little subdued since his advancement, but now he knew that it was because she was focusing on something else. What happened? You didn't say anything since my advancement. Priscilla sent him a response in a series of images followed by her explanation. He saw what looked like a cocoon, and from it came another version of Priscilla. Her usual scales had deepened in color, becoming almost pitch black to match those of his dragon form. Furthermore, her beak had grown thinner, becoming like an arrowhead. Your recent evolution allowed me to do the same. I have only just awoken from the evolution. My evolution was unexpected, but its power is true. Our connection has grown deeper as well. He got some more information from Priscilla. Learning of her recent developments. Her mind had improved the most from the evolution, as it had made the most sense. She primarily fought by controlling aspects of his creations and magic. Strengthening her body wouldn't do much for them. He got an idea of her capabilities and was excited to experiment with her new affinity. In order to help him, she had developed a true anti-magic affinity. It should make it easier for her to remove things like seals, and counter others' magic in general. Mash felt something tap against his shoulder, and he turned to see Jill staring at him. He had been too focused on his conversation with Priscilla and had completely missed what was happening. Can you at least act like you're listening? We need to talk about our trials and stuff. Mash winced at Jill's tone, though he knew that she was right. He gave her an apologetic look, before refocusing on the matter at hand. Ultimately, it was decided that the change in Jill looked more significant than it was. This did get them to talk about their abilities more, and that conversation naturally drifted to their trials. Now that all four of them were together, they went into a lot more detail as they retold their stories. Mash compared his opponents with what Luke had done and realized that their trials had been fairly similar. Both of them ultimately faced a strong opponent before leaving the dungeon. The Wyvern was probably weaker than the Lich, but not by much. Though maybe the difference was more pronounced than he realized, considering how many stats Luke had gained from his class. Mash considered his own options again and couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right choice. He had a class related to God and couldn't help but wonder if it would have been a better choice. Eventually, the conversation got around to Mash, and he explained his own experiences. He told them of everything, even what he had just figured out with Priscilla. The conversation had taken hours, but it hadn't been boring. Even after hearing Red's story twice, he was still invested in her story. Her family's role and actions surprised him, and he couldn't help but imagine other noble houses doing something similar. After talking with them about his trial and abilities, he moved to talk about the other world. About Daniel and the sects and how they were in a bad position. The invasion they were facing, and how he had promised to try and help. The others seemed invested, and Luke surprised everyone by speaking first. Normally, he would be the last to add his input, but he had mentioned that his class had made him more confident. "We should go. I want to help, and I think we can make a difference." Mash nodded along, his thoughts replicating what Luke had said. Only Red looked a little hesitant. She had explained her concern wasn't with their intentions, but with the timeline. Helping the world would be a commitment, and she didn't know if that would be for the best. Especially if they considered what the king had told Mash. He might cause other more disastrous events to happen if he involved himself too deeply. "Actually, I wanted to ask about that. What's up with Mash? It kind of looks like he is pulling on everything." Jill's words caught him off guard. Mash knew that he was different, but he didn't know what she meant by pulling. He was just sitting on the ground with his back pressed against a stone. She didn't direct the question at him either, instead, it was obviously pointed towards Red. They looked at one another for a moment, and Red glanced away as she started speaking. "I don't have all the answers, but I have an idea. Every so often someone is born that's like Mash. They are different from the moment they are born. When he told us of his past, I had an idea of what he might be. The stuff with the demons and the king's words confirmed it. Whenever people like him are born, it usually means something big is coming. If my guess is right, it will be centered around him. Also, if they survive, they tend to be strong." Red's explanation was insufficient, to say the least. If anything, Mash felt more confused now than he had before. He had known that he somehow caused things to happen with his presence, but he still thought it might just be a coincidence. Learning that it wasn't just a random coincidence was surprising. He thought back to his past. He could tell that he wasn't a normal kid, but he didn't think he was that strange. The others were looking at him as if they were waiting for him to react. He didn't know what to do or say. He could barely even understand what Red's words meant. It wouldn't really change anything either. Ever since the king's warning, he knew better than to do things carelessly. Plus, it sounded like he could mitigate the effects by moving regularly. Red had more to say on the matter too. She started explaining things in more detail, once she realized that he wasn't going to say anything.